Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Charlene with the Demand Solutions Marketing Team, and I'm just going to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So this is a 1-hour session, and we'll open up the Q&A in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the hour. Go ahead and submit your text questions by typing them into the questions area of the control panel. And if a question comes to mind mid-session, go ahead and send it to us at any time. We'll collect them and address them during the Q&A. And if we don't address your question during the Q&A, we will absolutely reach out afterwards. Also, please know that this webinar will be recorded, and yes, the recording will be emailed to you. Also, please stay tuned at the end of the Q&A as we will have some announcements from your local APICS Memphis chapter. So now I'm going to hand it off to John Dillingham, and you know him as the president of the APICS Memphis chapter. But he's also led the S&OP initiatives at Lucite International for the past 14 years. He is very experienced, and if you don't know John, he is such a joy to talk to. He has the warmest smile, and he has had a pretty impressive career in materials and operations management. So John, take it away for us.
All right, thank you, Charlene. Boy, it's really great to have the Memphis chapter with us, the Atlanta chapter with us, the Savannah chapter with us, and there may be other chapters also represented. So if there are, I would invite you to put that in the notes in the chat so we can know that. But anyway, thank you for coming today. I know you have a limited amount of time and won't spend a lot of time on all the welcomes, but I do welcome you and hope that this will be very good for you today, that you can take away something that you can use at your job. Because I know Fred Tolbert, Fred and I have known each other probably about 25 years, and the more I get to know Fred, the more I'm impressed with his knowledge of supply chain and also his desire to do things to help people in their jobs. Fred has been involved in APICS with the Atlanta chapter. He's currently the Southeastern Principal for Demand Solutions. He's been a past member of the APICS Board of Directors. He has worked as a principal consultant of North Highland, a director of operations for Sun Data, an inventory planning manager for Contel, systems development manager for Contel, and a senior consultant for Anderson Consulting. And the slide I've got here says he's a rock star of supply chain, and that is true. And if you get a chance to work with Fred, I know you'll enjoy it. And I know today you'll enjoy hearing what he has to say, and would encourage you to listen to what he has to say, pick up some things that you can use in your day-to-day work, but also if you have some questions, I invite you to ask those as we go later on at the question and answer time, so that you may have a question. I would guarantee you that others probably have the same question but are afraid to ask. So jump out there and ask those questions. And again, thank you for joining us today. Fred?
Well. Oh, I'm sorry. And before you hand it off to Fred, I just have to say the APICS Providence chapter is also representing in the house. Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Charlene, and thank you, John, and thank you, people, for attending the webinar today. As a career-long APICS member, hey, I'm totally committed to the fact that you have to continue your lifelong journey and your education journey, and so through opportunities like this and other things that the APICS chapter provides to you, is the way that we can help to keep our skills sharp. And as we talk about the impact of COVID on our operations, maybe this will generate some discussion, and maybe you'll come away from the presentation with some new thoughts or some new nuggets of information. So from an agenda of the presentation that we'll talk over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to have some initial comments, just my view of the impact of COVID-19 on the entire area of supply chain planning, and what some of the impact of that, and maybe some of the causes of some of the things that we see in our jobs as inventory planners, as demand planners, and sales and operations planning managers. And I've got some illustrations of companies that have utilized best practices to respond to the challenges that they have seen in the COVID-19 world. And then I'll close out with some thoughts that I have about where do we go from here? What are the fundamental changes that I see in the marketplace as a result of COVID-19? Some of those are going to be planning technique related, but others are going to be job execution related, and some thoughts that I have on that. And then we will have some time for Q&A. You should have the opportunity to enter notes or questions in the note panel on the dashboard that you have. Charlene will be reviewing those, and we'll be working through those at the end of the presentation. So everybody has a COVID story or a COVID-19 timeline. And it's interesting that we're almost a year into this thing, and what a crazy year 2020 has been. But here's some thoughts about my COVID-19 timeline. It was in December, so almost a year ago, when there was the first discussion and in the news about this mysterious virus in China that seemed to be different than any others that we had seen. And right after the first of the year in January, we found out that China was closing manufacturing plants and the potential disruptions that was going to have on the operations. It wasn't that long after that. It was actually a company where I was just outside of Birmingham, that the company had indicated that they were having an impact on supplier deliveries as a result of COVID. And to me, that was still new, and I said, wow, I hadn't thought of that being an impact to us. But that was in probably the middle of February, and then, hey, you remember exactly the day that the shutdown hit. I had a meeting. The last meeting that I had was on that Thursday. Was that March the 12th or 13th? I was at a customer site, and we were doing the fist bumping, but we were kind of laughing about it and saying, boy, isn't that interesting that we're doing that? But hey, who would have thought there on March the 12th or 13th, whatever the day was, that the impact that it would have on us during 2020 here. Through April and May, as the shutdown carried on, and then in our work life, we all became experts in the various tools, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Teams, WebEx, and all of those, the tools. And so that's become a fundamental way of conducting business day to day. It was a little bit later. It was actually toward the end of June. I actually had my first, and as far as it has been my only face-to-face customer meeting. So in all of these months, about 9 months now, I had the first face-to-face customer meeting in June with a customer of mine. We went to lunch and talked about things, but hey, there haven't been opportunities, and you sure don't talk to people that there's many opportunities even now to have face-to-face meetings. Everything is either on the phone or in Zoom. And so now here we are in the fall, many months later. And so, hey, do we see things getting back to normal, or are we headed to a round two? And it sounds like there's even some hints that as the fall comes along, there's an uptick in the number of cases, et cetera. So, hey, above all, it's just a matter of uncertainty of what we're seeing these days. When the shutdown occurred back in March, and all of a sudden, boy, there was the doom and gloom here about supply chains, and we first started seeing the shortages, and we saw it in grocery stores of the toilet paper and the sanitizer and paper towels and those things. But hey, in the news media, we had the Chicken Little response about the sky is falling, run. And so here are literally a list of things that we saw in news reports back there in the early days about the collapse of the global supply chains, as we saw some shortages. And the interesting thing is this: some of these are people that maybe I don't necessarily respect, but organizations like Bloomberg was talking about the collapse of the global supply chain. LA Times, which to me, shame on them for publishing that we were going to have rotting food, hungry masses, chaotic supply chains. That we were having broken supply chains that were going to create disruption, and this was in the agricultural area, the collapse of the global food supply chain. And especially, and what especially gets to me is the notion that the product shortages that we saw exposed the flaws of just-in-time supply chain. And so with all of these things, and my thought is the sky really falling? Is the global supply chain sky really falling? And a term that I've adopted that I really like, and I say, what a bunch of hooey. And people that are claiming collapse of the supply chain, that we're going to have hungry masses and chronic shortages, what a bunch of hooey, which if you look up hooey, a great word, a word for nonsense, because that's really what I think about the people that are claiming the gloom and doom in the supply chain. Have there been disruptions, and have there been product shortages? Not only, and the ones that you get the most maybe notice of, or what you see at the grocery store of, excuse me, the aisle with toilet paper and the paper towels, and you see in those that aisle empty. So have there been disruptions? Absolutely, there have been disruptions. But is the supply chain in total free fall? No way. And I think we've seen many examples of supply chains and supply chain professionals where they have risen to the task. We've seen a lot of examples of innovation as companies developed processes and products to address the masks, the gloves, the different personal protection devices. All of these, I think we saw extreme innovation and supply chain professionals rising to the task. Sure, are there shortages? And we'll get into a discussion of shortages here in a few seconds and what may have caused the shortages. But to me, supply chain professionals have responded to the challenge, and we certainly have made the best of a very difficult situation. And so, but at the same time, has this resulted in a wake-up call to supply chains and supply chain professionals? And I say absolutely. There's no doubt that this has been a major disruption. It's been a time of change. It's been a time of risk and a time of uncertainty. And so, this is a time for us to have a wake-up call and consider where do we go from here, and that being tools and with business processes. Through the presentation here today, we're going to have a number of poll questions, and Charlene is going to manage that. So you'll have an opportunity to provide some feedback. So she'll tell us about the poll question and how you respond to the poll.
So as you can see, the poll has popped up. In order to participate in the poll, go ahead and exit full screen mode. And you can do that by pressing on the escape key on your keyboard. And go ahead and participate.
That's the thing that we have seen there is you need to be out of the full screen mode to be able to enter. And maybe, Charlene, if you just go over the question there.
Yes. And so what has been the impact of COVID-19 on your business? Are sales down by more than 20%? Are sales down by 0 to 20%? I'm sorry about the noise. Has there been no change? Sales are up by 0 to 20%. Sales are up by more than 20%. And 47% have voted. Can we make it up to 50, more than 50? Challenge has been accepted. We are at 53%. Can we keep going? Ooh, 58, 63. We'll give a couple more seconds. And we will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the results, Fred.
Okay, and Charlene, I'll be honest with you, I'm not seeing the results. You can read them out to me.
So 0% have voted for sales are down by more than 20%. The majority have voted for sales are down by 0 to 20%. And then the close second one is the no change with 33% voting on that. Sales are up by 0 to 20% is 17%. And sales are up by more than 20% is just 8%.
Okay, so hey, tell me what was the category with the biggest impact, the most responses?
It was sales are down by 0 to 20%.
Yeah. So and I work with a lot of different companies, and it's interesting. We've seen companies that in the early days of COVID, the demand dropped, and the most that I worked with now, you hear about the airlines and things like that where the business was off by 80-90%, but I worked with a company whose business in the early days was down 65%. That's the most extreme, but it goes all the way to the other end of things where there's companies that are in certain businesses where they've had a boom in business by 20, 30 or more % because of the nature of their products. And so, maybe people had, we're in a shutdown, business is going to be off for everybody, but the fact is there's a lot of companies, if they sell products into the home market, in the recreation products market, in the do-it-yourself or that supply the Home Depot and Lowe's of the world, hey, business is booming for those people. So I just wanted to get a sense of what the impact has been on different companies. So I think it's interesting results. Now we're going to talk for a few minutes here about examples of the impact of COVID, and one of the most visible ones for us is the world of toilet paper and hand sanitizer. And so this is a sales graph of a customer of ours that shared with us their experience in the sales there of toilet paper, and this is case volume. And so the orange is the 2019 sales. And so you see that for a category, toilet paper, you know, the fact of the matter is demand for toilet paper is relatively stable. You see some ups and downs and that sort of thing, but the fact is that this customer had seen fairly stable demand in the about the 18,000 cases a week category. And so what happened with COVID? And there in March, you see when the panic buying hit. And so immediately in a week's time almost, the demand came close to doubling, and that continued. So the panic buying, and that carried on there for a number of weeks, and then maybe a predictable, everybody cleaned out the grocery stores and the Costco's of the world. You saw them coming out with buggies with big stacks of the mega size packs of toilet paper. So then after everyone had their big supply, all of a sudden they did not need to buy any, and the demand plummeted. So you can see it went down from 30,000 a week almost immediately down to about 8,000 a week. And then it stayed in that area significantly below the average. And even there's been a little bit of an uptick there as there were some new outbreaks there at the end of the summer. But hey, if you're an inventory planner, how do you deal with a life where the demand immediately almost doubled and then plummeted down by 2/3 and then stayed at well below what your historic norms have been? So hey, a challenge of dealing with toilet tissue, but now contrast that with sanitizer. And hey, a lot of people may have had that bottle of sanitizer somewhere in their house, probably a lot of them not, but you can see there again, the average demand of the sanitizers had been about 3,000 cases a week there, but boy, immediately people went looking for sanitizer. And instead of just having one of those push bottles of sanitizer, all of a sudden you wanted one in every room. And so the demand literally almost within a month's time tripled, and that actually has stayed higher and way higher than, you know, the average weekly demand over the previous year. So whereas toilet paper, and the fact is the demand of toilet paper stayed over time stays fairly constant, but now they're seeing that people have hoarded and have plenty, and so they're not buying as much, but the demand on the sanitizer side is now running multiple times what the average demand had been pre-COVID. And so why were we seeing shortages, especially at retail and in the APICS world? And those of you that have been around and have seen, you know, have had the opportunity to participate in the beer game, that's been an age-old APICS illustration of the impact of the bullwhip effect. And so the bullwhip effect totally describes what went on with the shortages at retail, where the bullwhip effect, small changes in demand at retail, cascade back through the supply chain to create far bigger impacts as you go back through each level of the distribution channel. So and this describes the supply chain for a bottling company. And so at retail, relatively small changes in demand cascade back through the wholesaler, through the bottler, all the way back to the initial brewery, to see that those small, relatively small changes have significant impact on the demand back at the manufacturing facility. And so then turn those changes in demand to be significant changes in demand, unprecedented changes in demand at retail. And as that cascades back through the supply chain, you saw crazy changes in demand back on our manufacturing companies. And so the bullwhip defined, you know, the inaccurate or distorted demand information created in the supply chain. And the fact is, the reasons why relatively small changes in demand at the end of the supply chain as they cascade back through here. And here's some of the causes of the bullwhip effect. And so certainly the short-term abnormal demand starts the ball rolling. And so then each level in the supply chain, we have people that are seeing changes in demand, and the people at each level are then updating their sales forecast. The fact is we have lot sizes and order batching rules, minimums and multiples that are in excess of what may be needed for one period of supply. We may have batch sizes that, instead of 1 month or 1 week of supply, they're an entire month of supply. So then that demand increases even a little bit at retail. Those order batches compound the impact of those changes. The long lead times, and we have systems that deal with lead time demand, so the order quantities get increased significantly. And so as the demand changed and we're ordering reorder points to cover us through the entire lead time, all of a sudden those big orders are placed on suppliers. Price fluctuations change. People are ordering in advance of price increases, or promotions are causing changes in demand. Then we saw in some cases rationing, where companies were limiting supply. So so consumers were trying to work around that and try to work around any kind of rationing situations. And then the hoarding behavior, especially in the toilet paper and paper towel and sanitizer, we had people that were buying quantities far in advance of, or in addition to what they would use on a relatively short term. So all of these are causes of what we see as the bullwhip effect as the changes in demand work their way back through the supply chain. So why were we out of stock? And so actually there's two different illustrations here of toilet paper. The changes in toilet paper, two main issues. We certainly had hoarding behavior. When people thought we were going to be in quarantine and there were going to be short supplies, they bought product way in advance or way in addition to what they would use in any kind of reasonable time frame. So the hoarding mentality certainly took effect, as well as in the toilet paper, there was a channel shift, a major change in the allocation since between retail and professional. And professional world is the office buildings and the hotels and schools and other businesses. And so as people were not going into those buildings, all of a sudden the demand shifted from people being some portion of their days in professional environments, all back in the home. So that demand totally changed, and so the retail demand picked up, and that was again a cause of shortages. The total market demand has not increased significantly. Had the population's essentially the same, and the fact is the number of times a day that they need toilet paper, that has not changed, but the allocation between the market and overcoming hoarding behavior certainly had an impact on us from a toilet paper standpoint. Different story in the hand sanitizer, the soap and detergent market. Certainly there were hoarding symptoms in those days that compounded, but the fact is the raw materials and the packaging shortages also had a big change in the availability of hand sanitizer. As the demand went up, what were there was the different raw materials and the alcohol, and what did we see? We saw companies, breweries and distilleries and all of that changed over to actually making sanitizer as they shifted demand. But the raw materials that went into the sanitizers and the detergents, they had shortages. So in many of those raw materials, they were competing between different products. So the same raw materials in some cases went into wipes and the PPE devices. And so as we allocated production between those categories, we certainly saw shortages there. So while toilet paper demand, total market demand has not increased significantly, the total market demand for sanitizer and other detergents is up significantly for some companies. And I heard Clorox talk about some of their products and their wipes. The demand is up over 500% over what it was pre-COVID. So you can just imagine the challenges that companies have had meeting the demand of those products. So we now have poll number 2. And Charlene, if you could read the questions out for us.
Yes, so Fred, it is poll o'clock again. So we're launching our second poll. And as a reminder, please go ahead and exit full screen mode in order to participate. So the question is, what planning techniques did you use to respond to COVID-19? SKU level sales forecast adjustments, product family forecast adjustments and prorated down to SKUs, safety stock, safety time adjustments, work with plants and suppliers to expedite or de-expedite shipments, or there's been no significant changes to day-to-day operations. And 25% have voted. We will keep it open for a little while. Go ahead. Awesome. We are at 45%. Let's keep collecting some answers there. Proposing a challenge. Can we make it to 75%, guys? Can we? We're at 55. And the polls will be, they are anonymous, so don't worry. All right, we are still at 55%. All right, well, I guess we will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the results. And Fred, you're not able to see the results, are you?
No, I'm not.
So I will tell you 55%, the majority have voted for working with plants and suppliers to de-expedite and expedite shipments. That was the majority. And then there's a close tie with 45% to SKU level sales forecast adjustments and safety stock and safety time adjustments.
Right.
And only 27% have selected product family forecast adjustments and prorated down to SKUs.
So, hey, and what I see, and that to me would suggest enlightened responses, because in many cases, companies think that the COVID issue is a forecasting issue, that they can forecast their way out of this, the supply chain issues. But working with suppliers, collaborating, and we'll have more conversations about collaboration here as we go forward. And certainly there is a forecasting component of that, and managing inventory and safety stock inventory are common responses. So I'm frankly glad to hear the responses that the people gave to our poll question here. So as we talk about this, how do we respond to the world of COVID? And put yourself in the shoes of a demand manager, and this is one of your high volume items. And boy, how would you like to be a planner for this item? This is one of my customers' items. It's an A item, it's one of their high volume items. It's a very expensive product. It's $300 a piece. And pre-COVID demand was about 200 units a month. And so you can see that the forecast here back in the February, March timeframe, was in the 300 units a month. There is some seasonality here, but hey, look what happened. All of a sudden, the demand dropped off the table. In April, it dropped in about half, and in May, it dropped by about way more than half again. And so, hey, something that you were selling 200 to 300 units a month, all of a sudden we were at 15, 18, and 13. So if you think there's a forecasting response to that, you're probably always going to be disappointed here if that's our expectation, that we can forecast through demand shifts like this, to where our average demand used to be 200 a month and then it dropped to 15, 18, and 13. How are we going to forecast our way out of that? So looking back at this, boy, you could certainly see the impact of COVID, beginning even in February, when we had a forecast of 295 and our demand was 44% below that. And then for each of the months after that, some big swings, and finally things have started to come back, but at a very significantly reduced demand level. And so from a technique, I've always been a proponent of looking for and dealing with the high side forecast bias. And so we're looking for situations where we can tell where we've got issue when there's 3 times where the high side, the forecast is high. So you see in February, we were 44% high, March 150%, 1,000%. So those are alerts that should tell us that we have significant issues with these items and that we need to make forecast adjustments. So, hey, if our demand is fairly random, hey, you're going to have some periods where your forecast is high and other periods where your forecast is low. So one time with the forecast high is a fluke, and twice may be a coincidence, but 3 times in a row is a trend. So, hey, we knew in April that we had a significant issue with one of our high volume items here. So I also have a discussion here of what some companies that I work with and what they have done that I put in the category of best practices in their demand and supply planning capabilities. And so this is a company, the first example is a company that's in the food and beverage industry, and they sell products not only to retail, but also to food service and the restaurant business. And so you'll hear me talk multiple times about using alerts to identify items with significant changes and movement, or where we're shipping below forecast. This company did in fact use those alerts to make SKU level forecast adjustments. And what those adjustments did, they gave signals to the procurement, because they both purchase product, but they also produce product in-house. So those forecast adjustments sent signals to ramp down the production quantities. And they utilized customer specific forecasting. So they had forecast records at an individual account level, and that allowed them to identify huge increases in certain markets that weren't affected by COVID. And they used a variety of system tools to adjust the forecast. You see alerts and expanded visibility of seeing month-to-date orders along with the open orders, and they were able to quickly react to, as companies, and in their case, restaurants, began to reopen. So they had good visibility of the demand changes on the way down and then on the way back up. Another company that I work with is in the spare parts business. They sell products, and so they supply the aftermarket spare parts. And so our challenge to them was, and they were saying, hey, how do we deal with the forecasting issues as the demand dropped off and inventory was staying high? And so, our discussion back to them was, you can't expect a demand planner to have the answer of when the COVID-19 world is going to get back to normal. So we said, hey, the assumptions for the forecasting process and demand management has to come from executive management. We have to have scenarios that let us respond under different situations. Demand is going to return, demand is going to stay low, or it's going to ramp back up over time. So, to me, you can't expect a staff level forecast planner be the person that's the pulse of the company in how we get out of the COVID-19 inventory issues. From a tactical response, and this company buys many of their spare parts, and so we developed a process, and it worked really well, of ranking vendors, since they did their procurement by vendor or supplier. So we did an ABC ranking on those suppliers. We were able to adjust not only the forecast, but safety stock strategies for their A suppliers. Since the bulk of their business was in products that were supplied by the A suppliers, they were able to make tactical adjustments to the forecast and to their safety stock strategies. And again, for A items, they could change how many weeks of supply they intended to keep, and they varied that by A items, B items, and C items. Like the other company, and we're certainly big on helping companies to identify and to create alerts. And so you see some of those, again, month-to-date sales compared to the forecast. As you get through to the middle of the month, how are your forecasts going, or how your sales lining up to your forecast errors, high forecast errors, out of stocks. You can see different kind of alerts there. And we also have a very nice tool for inventory performance summaries that on a vendor by vendor basis, we can project out into the future what the projected inventory levels are. Another company, and one of the companies that I value this person's expertise from a demand planning standpoint, and they saw that they were able to quickly identify shifts in their products. And you're going to see here bolded a number of times different levels of collaboration with their customers, and meeting weekly to identify changes, both up and down, and collaborating not only with customers, but also internally with marketing, with sales, to develop the best plans going forward. On the supply side, again, they made shifts and they lowered safety stock levels, and that slowed down their replenishment process. They went through an allocation process. Very good. Hey, when inventory is short, you frankly have to implement allocation rules that your scarce inventory gets allocated to your most important customers, and they implemented that. Again, you see the highlighted term of results. Companies have too many items, they have too many options, and so alerts help you to identify the items that need the most attention. And again, the sales and operations planning process help them to evaluate risk. And so I think one of the big things coming out of COVID is going to be risk management, and what the sales and operations planning process can help you to do in risk management. Now, I also got information from one of our good Memphis area companies. John gave us some input about his company, and so I'm going to let him talk here in just a second about some of the things they've seen about COVID, but from a demand planning and hey, typical issues that they saw. The demand for their main product skyrocketed as it was used in how companies reacted or responded to COVID, and that was a significant increase in their products. And so another product group they have varied by the market that it was sold in. In one channel, the automotive channel, the sales of the products declined significantly, but the same type of product as it was sold into retail and the do-it-yourself markets significantly increased. And so this is typical of what you see companies having. In the supply planning world, as that product demand skyrocketed, the raw material became in short supply, and there were shortages, and the challenge to source the adequate supply of the raw material has been a challenge for them. But John's discussion, hey, S&OP process encouraged close customer collaboration, and that's been a key to them, looking forward and being successful here in the COVID days. So, John, you have any other comments that you want to make about how you all have survived the COVID world?
Let me just add, I can just give a picture to some of these products. Our product goes into anything acrylic, okay? And if you think of the acrylic sheeting that's being used for protective barriers, that's our main product that skyrocketed. Our customers that make that, the demand skyrocketed. Our products also were made in the automotive market. Well, that declined. Also, acrylic paints use our product. Well, there were people staying at home and they were kept busy painting their house. And so that market did increase some, but not as much as those acrylic sheets. So also within supply planning, one of our main components for a product is acetone. Acetone is a byproduct in the production of phenol. Phenol is used in the polycarbonates. Polycarbonates are used in the auto market. So the auto market declining meant that less phenol is produced, meant that less acetone is available. So it was a challenge to get enough raw material to make the product we need. So we had to make sure we stayed in close collaboration with our customers, make sure we kept them satisfied. And also, I think a key that communication went up all around with our suppliers and also internally, so to make sure that everyone was on the same page and everybody knew the game plan. All right, Fred, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yep. No, John, thank you. I think that's a.
Hey, Fred and John, I have
yes.
Jeff Leroy who wants to add a comment to this conversation. Would that be okay with you guys? All right, Jeff, I'm going to unmute you, and you are unmuted.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, John. John, I also work in the chemicals industry for a very large conglomerate as well, and we service one of our division services into the automobile industry. Demand was cut very low, as you mentioned, and we also service into refineries and some of the same businesses that you do as well. Interesting enough, when this COVID came around, and I'm strictly involved in the S&OP process, recently developed it and implemented it as well. So we completed what we call the sprint analysis just at the beginning of it, so that we could develop all these assumptions and do some what-if scenario planning. And we based our demand plan on these assumptions. And interesting enough, and you're probably going through this right now, with some recent developments in the industry, for instance, a vaccine might be available earlier than expected. We are going back to readjust our assumptions and do some additional what-if scenario planning. Excuse me. Secondly, now that we're changing here in the U.S. To a new president, supposedly, and we might be embarking on a different energy plan. So this, again, is changing some of our underlying assumptions, which drives our demand plan. So these are all part of the embedded in the S&OP planning process. You hit a lot of key points as far as being as close to your customer as possible with clear, concise, and transparent communications. But I thought I would just enlighten the conversation a little bit more as far as being able to do these type of analysis, develop your assumptions, and then create a demand plan based on your assumptions. And of course, tracking those assumptions for their validity. So just my comment point to it.
Hey, great comments from two real pros. And my response is, I wish people from Bloomberg and the LA Times could hear this. Does that sound like supply chains in total disarray? And so this is the kind of response that supply chain professionals give. Hey, they deal with the changes and they come up with practical, workable solutions. So I applaud both of you guys for the things that you've done to help your companies respond. So we've talked maybe some definition of and some history of the COVID pandemic, what the impact has been, what some companies have done to respond to that. And so now, where do we go from here? And so, hey, this year has been a wake-up call to all of us. And when will business return to normal? I don't think anybody has a handle on that, or an idea when or if it will. And so who knows? I frankly don't expect it to anytime soon, very honestly. But I think what has happened is that this as a wake-up call has exposed companies that have outdated business processes and outdated tools. We've talked about the need for responsiveness. We've talked about the need for collaboration, and that's hard to do with silo organizations, and it's hard to do with Excel spreadsheets. And so this has companies that are dependent on those kind of things are probably seeing themselves not being as flexible as other companies who have invested in improved tools and improved processes. Hey, the winners in the supply chain market will adapt and they'll prosper. And I think the losers will blame COVID-19 for their poor results. Early on, boy, we saw companies, especially public companies, and in their financial results, they were blaming their poor results on COVID-19. And hey, there's definitely been an impact on companies, especially that have seen sales decreases. But the fact is, we have to adapt. We have to change our processes if we're going to be successful going forward. Charlene, our third poll here.
Yes, so the third poll has launched. So go ahead and exit full screen mode to participate. And we are asking, what are your post-COVID-19 supply chain planning plans? Are you implementing new demand planning capabilities? Are you implementing new sourcing and supply chain planning capabilities in general? Are you implementing new supply chain analytics and KPIs? Are you implementing improved S&OP processes, or just continuing business as usual? And we have 21% who have voted, so we are going to give people some time to respond. And the votes are coming in. And we are at 53%. All right, well, if everyone's voted, we will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And these are the results. So the most popular plan is to implement S&OP processes, better processes, with 50%, Fred. And then the second most popular one is to implement new sourcing capabilities or supply chain planning tools in general. And then we have a close tie with 10% on each of those, with implement new demand planning capabilities, that's 10%. Implement new supply chain analytics KPIs, that's 10%. And 10% are continuing business as usual.
Hey, that's good. It sounded like S&OP processes and capabilities seem to be the winner there. So again, I would applaud our audience for having progressive thoughts and plans and strategies going forward. Hey, and hey, up front, I'm a guy that sells and implements demand planning, supply planning, S&OP. But hey, the fact is, you're not going to forecast your way out of the COVID issues, and having a sales and operations planning, or today we use the term integrated business planning capabilities. I think we'll see maybe better benefits out of tools like that. So our parent company Logility, along with CSCMP, which is a professional society of supply chain management professionals, and this was a poll that we commissioned, and it's actually right before COVID. It was in early 2020. And executives still feel that their top priorities, not only sales and operations planning, but improving forecast accuracy. Everybody, I think, wants forecast improvements, but there may be what I term unrealistic expectations of what forecast accuracy can be. But these areas, sales and operations planning, production planning, other initiatives, we see here what executives had called their highest priorities going forward. And so my thoughts of planning trends. And so in the demand planning world, hey, the fact of the matter is forecasting is no longer a statistical exercise. I mean, different systems use some different formulas, but most every system has multiple formulas and has the system pick the most accurate formula. But there's very little competition between software companies these days on forecast formulas. But it's more in the area of generating alerts and identifying items that are not performing well from an accuracy standpoint. There's a lot of attention paid these days to master data and to data cleansing, getting your history clean, and eliminating the impact of demand spikes, demand swings. Multi-channel demand planning is certainly one of the hot topics, and by that, having different demand streams for different business channels: retail, distributor, web traffic, the online functions like Amazon and HomeDepot.com and Walmart.com, having a demand forecast for products by specific channels and by specific customers. Having that customer level forecasting is getting more and more common. When will business return to normal? I'm not so sure that it will return to normal. I think overall there's a trend to more granular time periods. Traditionally, forecasting has been a monthly cadence, and I think over time, and especially in consumer products, high promotion items, I think the move to weekly forecasting is probably going to continue. But definitely the idea, and this is the overall term, demand sensing, of having the systems more responsive to short-term demand plans, possibly utilizing customer either point of sale data, but customer generated data that's sent back to you, and using that to generate the demand plan. So again, demand sensing is that idea of using short-term sales history to generate short-term forecasts. And I think over time there will be more, especially in maybe the little more sophisticated market, the whole area of causal forecasting and understanding the true demand drivers. And by causal forecasting, that's taking into, in some markets, housing starts, advertising, web hits, weather, these kinds of things that are over and above just the basic sales history that's used to generate demand plans. On the supply planning side, I think what one of the big changes coming out of COVID is going to be more and more attention paid to multi-vendor sourcing. Whereas a lot of times we may have had a primary vendor, companies to reduce risk may in fact now spread their product sourcing over multiple suppliers. And so it will be up to the software companies to make it easier for companies to be able to do vendor and manage multi-vendor sourcing. There'll be looks to get to shorter lead times. And there's a lot of news these days about reshoring and bringing manufacturing back onto shore. I'm frankly, maybe a little less optimistic on that. I know there's initiatives to do that, but hey, the fact remains that we've got a significant labor shortage here. So I think that's going to keep pressure on our ability to bring substantial manufacturing back on shore. So there, I'm qualifying that of I'm not so sure how quickly that's going to take. The whole area of analytics, supplier scorecards, customer scorecards, key performance indicators, I think certainly is going to get more and more attention paid. safety stock technologies and more sophisticated methods of calculating safety stock. I think we're going to see more and more attention to that. Capacity planning, I think, is going to get more and more attention. Not only the replenishment planning or master scheduling, but taking that down to the shop floor and being able to manage capacity and allocate capacity to the most important items, the most profitable items, reducing changeover times. All of these, this whole area of capacity planning and scheduling, I think, is going to be more and more important. The ability to allocate scarce inventory to high priority customers. If we only have X amount of inventory, companies may, instead of just having a FIFO allocation out to orders, they're going to allocate the inventory to their most important customers. And so I think techniques to being able to do that is going to be important. In the area of integrated business planning and sales and operations planning, there's been some research here within the last year, and some of the analysts, a webinar by the IBF, Institute of Business Forecasting, the topic was, has time passed S&OP by? And the fact is, the research says that companies using an S&OP process, their performance is worse than it actually was 10 years ago. So, hey, my comment is, if S&OP is still relevant, now is the time for S&OP processes, S&OP professionals, and S&OP tools to shine. Gartner, you're familiar with Gartner, the IT research firm. They've published an S&OP maturity model, integrated, or the Institute of Business Forecasting. They have recently published a new S&OP maturity model. So it will be, I think those are good sources, especially the IBF model would be a good one to check to see where your S&OP process is along that maturity curve. And so what is coming out is a whole new generation of analytics to support the S&OP process. You hear a lot about digital twin technology, and that's especially important in scenario planning and having visibility to the global supply chain. And that certainly helps in the discussion of multi-plant sourcing decisions of what plant is the most profitable to use and the most efficient to use to provide products. Alternate freight considerations, the analysis of whether to use air, freight, air, trucking, rail, all of these kind of options are what the S&OP analytics these days can help us to manage. So another topic, I think, the whole area of advanced analytics, you see my term there is it's going to go mainstream. I think we're going to see a proliferation of analytics tools. Hey, for years we've had BI capabilities, report writer capabilities, but I think we're going from BI to really these analytics being tools to assist us in making good decisions, not just reporting about what happened in the past. And so there's more and more being published about advanced analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And so in the past, a lot of these tools required a heavy statistical background. And so the fact is that the tools are getting more and more friendly for end users, and I say, APICS kind of planners to be able to effectively manage their business using these tools. There's a whole continuum of the capabilities of analytics. There are basic analytics. We use the term native analytics that are pre-built and ready to use, primarily coming straight out of the supply chain system. There's other levels that provide for more configuration and multi-sourcing of inventory data. Then cognitive, and this really gets into the AI and the machine learning, and I've got some examples of what that is. And then certainly enterprise level analytics is having tools available to be the foundation for your entire supply chain analytics and KPI standpoint. What's coming forward, and I think here we're hearing more and more, and I think it's going to go from being sort of classroom or pie in the sky kind of things to actually being used in real life. And analytics, causal forecasting, I mentioned taking into account econometric measures, housing starts, promotions, these are things that are having an impact on our forecasting. Demand sensing is using that short-term customer demand data to generate a short-term forecast. More sophisticated demand forecasting, pricing, and promotion analysis. Hey, if the price decreases by 5%, what does that do to the demand? We'll see more and more of that, these kind of capabilities in the future. So, people have always had BI tools and report writers, and this is an example of pretty typical, column fodder. And so the key is to take this kind of reporting and turn it into graphs and dashboards that make it more easy to use and more readily available to identify what are the key exceptions and what do I need to take action on. So as a conclusion here, my comments are COVID-19 has been the greatest impact on supply chain planning. I go back to the 9/11 days. We certainly had the recession, way more than 10 years ago, but this has been the biggest thing, frankly, in a generation. Many companies had tools in place to cope with the impact. Frankly, others did not. And so others had their processes exposed, and they're a lot of times the ones that are blaming COVID on bad results. And so the challenge for us is to use the lessons that we've learned coming out of COVID to make generational, that's my term, generational advances in the tools and business processes. So I appreciate you all joining us. I know we're squeezed for time here, so I may just suggest, Charlene, unless any questions have come through from the people that we close things off, but do we have anything right quick?
We did have one question from Bill Stankiewicz. I'm sorry for butchering your name, Bill. He is asking, can my company make me come back to work if I don't have childcare?
Well, I'm certainly no human resource expert, or what the changes in all this was going to be. And so, hey, frankly, I'm not equipped to answer that question, frankly. But one of the conclusions that I have made, I think, is that are things going to go back to normal? I don't think they're going back to normal anytime soon. I think there's a fundamental shift in our work life. I think it's going to be less and less common that we're going to go back into an office environment. I think it's going to be less and less common for companies to have big office buildings and multiple floors, and you go into work every day in a cube or an office. I think we're seeing a fundamental change that we'll look back years from now and say, hey, boy, can you remember, isn't it strange that we went every day into the office here? So, I will just say we're at a time where there's fundamental changes, young people getting out of school that are starting new jobs. In many cases, they're even starting in a virtual mode. So, hey, we're at a fundamental change time in our work life experience here.
We sure are. And Bill is commenting, let's all keep our masks on.
Yep. No, hey, so hey, it's a different world out there, and but above all, I appreciate everyone registering, joining us today. We had a good exchange of information. Those are great comments by John. There were great comments that we had coming through from the audience. So I appreciate you joining us today, and you can reach me, ftolbert@demandsolutions.com, and I'd be glad to provide information to you or to respond to specific questions that you have.